really matters? That might be the most important question you can ask. So let's talk about it. Welcome to What Really Matters podcast, Everyday Spirituality with Karen Wyatt. Thanks for joining me here again today. I just realized that this is episode number 99. So next week, I will actually reach the milestone of 100 episodes. And when I first started this podcast, I promised myself when I got to 100, if I made it that far with the podcast, I would stop and take a look and reevaluate what I want to do, if I want to continue this podcast or not. So I will do that over this coming week. I will take a look at, have I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish with this podcast? Is there still more to do? And should I continue? But I'll definitely be back next week for episode 100, and I'll tell you what I conclude in that thought process of mine. But this week, I'm going to talk about what does it mean to find meaning in life and death? Or at least, what do I mean when I talk about that? And this subject came up because recently I was having a discussion with someone I know, and I mentioned the fact that in spite of the tragic death of my father so many years ago, I've been able to find so much meaning in that experience over time, because it was my father's death and the subsequent grief that I struggled with that led me into hospice work, which was a profound experience to me and really helped me grow spiritually and changed how I lived my life day to day. And I ended up writing some books about that, and eventually ended up doing what I'm doing now, this podcast and the End of Life University podcast, becoming a speaker and doing some other teaching as well. And so for me, there has been deep meaning in the fact that my father's suicide death, which at the time seemed very senseless and unnecessary, has come full circle in some ways to a place where I can now look back at that very painful memory and see that there has been meaning where I wasn't sure there was meaning, or at least I was able to find meaning or create meaning in the process of dealing with the trauma of his death. But the person that I was talking to reacted negatively to my saying that, and basically said, well, that could be true for you, but not everything has meaning. Not everything that happens has a meaning to it. There are no silver linings. Not everything works out the way it should or the way we want it to. And I refuse to believe that it does. Some things are just senseless. And so I took those words with me, and I've been thinking about that ever since. And thinking about how might I have explained myself better to this person, to maybe give more clarity into what I'm talking about when I talk about meaning, because I understand completely so many things that happen in any given day in our own lives appear completely random and senseless. It's hard to say that there's a meaning behind them. It's hard to say that having a flat tire on the interstate has a meaning to it or a purpose, or that there's a reason for it to happen. And so I completely understand that way of thinking, that when you look at individual events on a day-to-day basis, it's very hard to say in some of the many tragedies and traumas that happen in life. It's very difficult to say that there is a positive meaning or a silver lining in each one of those events. And I remember a few years back when someone wrote a blog titled Everything Doesn't Happen for a Reason. And that blog went viral and got so many positive comments and so many people joining in saying, thank you for saying this. I've been waiting for someone to say this. And it was in response to this notion, and it's almost like a Hallmark card notion that, well, everything happens for a reason. And it turns out that's one of the things on the list that you should never say to someone who is grieving or someone who has experienced a tremendous loss and is suffering because of that loss. It's actually a really insensitive thing to say to them, because you're telling them that this horrible experience they've just had contains meaning, and there's a reason for it, but somehow they're missing it. They're missing the point, and they're blind to that meaning. So I get why that particular phrase, and especially when it's spoken at the wrong time, can be hurtful and very offensive. And I understand why that blog post with the title "Everything Doesn't Happen for a Reason" became so popular, because people were tired of hearing platitudes in a way that imply that life is easier than it really is, that imply that it should be easy to go through these challenges in life and the difficulties of life. And I thought about the various ways in which each one of us finds meaning, because we do know from working with dying patients that finding meaning in life is actually one of the challenges for people on their deathbeds who are at the end of life, is trying to look back at their own lives and piece together some sort of meaning. And so it appears to be built into us in a way that we long to find meaning in things. And so how do we put this together? There's a drive to find meaning, and yet our rational minds tell us that not everything could possibly have meaning in it. And so that seems to lead us on a confusing circular path in a way of wanting to find meaning, needing meaning, and yet being told that meaning doesn't exist in many of the experiences that we have in life. In doing some research for this article, I came across a study done by the Pew Research Center that looked at where do people find meaning in life, and they studied people from 17 different countries in the world. And I found it interesting that one commonality they found in all of these countries is that people in general found meaning in their relationships, family, friends, those they love, and that those connections scored very high on everyone's list in terms of what provides meaning to their life. For many people, their job or career provided meaning. For others, material success provided meaning. And also for many people, doing good work in the world and feeling that they were making a contribution to the world was another source of meaning. And I found it interesting that human beings do have these certain drives to create meaning and to find meaning in life wherever we can. And I don't think most people would argue with the idea that we're searching in positive ways to find meaning in life, but where it seems to trigger some people is when we talk about finding meaning in the traumas and the difficulties of life. That seems to be what leaves people feeling hurt and offended. And yet, for me, that is the richest source of meaning in my own life. So from there, I turned to one of my favorite teachers, Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, and I'm sure you're aware was a psychiatrist who was in a Nazi concentration camp, and he ran a clinic there, took care of the prisoners in the concentration camp as they were dying. And so what he observed in the concentration camp is that the people who survived were the people who found some way of creating meaning out of the situation they were in. Those who found no meaning in it tended to be hopeless and tended to have less will to live and were more likely to die in the concentration camp. But Frankl wrote this: ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of his life is, but rather must recognize that it is he who is asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. And so what Frankl is saying is it isn't so much that we should look at our lives and say, where's the meaning within you? That life looks at us and says, what is the meaning that you are going to bring to this world and to this life? So that in some ways, finding meaning is part of our responsibility as creatures living here on the planet, creatures with a cerebral cortex who can think about things like meaning and purpose. It's our own responsibility to find whatever meaning there could be for us in this lifetime. And that's how I see it. That's what I completely agree, that it isn't that the events of life themselves come with a certain meaning and that it's up to us to dig into it to find it. It's that we are responsible within our own lives for discovering meaning in life itself and in death itself for ourselves. And I'm looking at this. I remember Steve Jobs in his famous commencement speech at Stanford University talked about how you can only connect the dots of your life backwards in retrospect by looking back on your life. That's the only way you can connect the dots and see how certain events connect together. And this reminds me of a dream I know I've talked about on this podcast before, whether you've heard it or not, but a dream where I was taken into a circular room and I saw this montage of little videos playing on the walls. It was of the room. And as I looked closer, each little video was a tiny scene from my life, something that had happened. And there were scenes from every part of my life. Millions of them displayed on the walls of this circular room, but they all fit together, the way they were woven together to make this like amazing tapestry on the wall of the room. And what I recognized as I looked at that is that each one of these events was necessary in order for some other event to take place. I saw that they were all connected. There was this incredible pattern that existed throughout all of these little scenes of my life. And some of the scenes were wonderful, amazing things that happened. Some of them were terrible tragedies like my father's death. And some were a tiny moment like tying my shoe or eating an ice cream cone. But the most important thing is that they were all connected. And this amazing, beautiful tapestry that was formed on the walls of this room of all these tiny videos, this was my life. All of these events were all connected because they were all part of my life. And so what I took away from that dream and what I saw is that my life as a whole has meaning for me, and I'm able to discover it and to see it and to find it for myself and to create the meaning that exists in my life. And my death will be part of that meaning as well whenever that happens. And likewise, all of our lives have meaning upon this planet and within this universe, as vast and immeasurable as it is. There is a meaning when we tie it all together and we see the connections between everything. And so that I understood is what sometimes may go missing for some people who object to saying, in this moment, something horrible just happened to me, and you're asking me what the meaning of it is. There is no meaning. This is senseless. And it's so true. You cannot say that one person's pain in this moment should have meaning for them in that moment. This is part of this person's life and part of their path. And it's possible that there will be a time or a day down the road when they will look back and they will connect a dot between that event and something else that will make sense to them, that will provide some sort of meaning to them. But it's also possible that that won't happen. It's also possible that person will not ever see it that way, will not ever see that there could be any meaning that could arise from that event. It's possible, and that's because it's the choice of the individual. It's part of our own life. We, in a sense, we have this opportunity to forge our way through the world and through our life, and to make our own choices for how we look at things. And for me, one of my choices has been to really work on the lens or the filter through which I view the world and through which I look at the things that happen to me. And I know that my lens, my filter, is influenced by the wounds that I carry, by my own shadow, the things that I have not yet healed inside of me. So part of my job and my responsibility in life as I receive it is to keep working on healing whatever wound is still inside of me. And the more I do that, the more I work on these wounds, the more I work on my own growth, the clearer my filter becomes, the clearer the lens becomes, the more easily I'm able to look out at life, to look back on all these experiences, and even in the moment, to look at what is happening right now, and to be a more neutral witness of these events of my life. And of course, still, all the time, things happen that I cannot explain, I cannot understand, I cannot find a reason or a meaning or the silver lining within this event. But I'm able to hold each one of those events and be patient with them and understand it's possible that one day I will get a glimpse of that mural again, and it will be a lot bigger now. There will be even more little videos of things. Perhaps if that happens in that moment, I will see where the little video of this thing that just took place fits in. I will be able to see it as part of the whole of my life and understand how it belongs in my life. How it just fits with who I am, and it contributes to who I am, and it helps shape who I am right now. And there's another quote that has been attributed to Albert Einstein, though I've read that no one can find an actual source for this quote, and so I'm really fascinated. I guess it was attributed to Einstein way back in the 1940s, but no one knows for sure if it's real, and many people dislike this quote, and therefore they don't want to believe that it could have been said by Albert Einstein. I have no idea if Einstein said it or not, but the quote is, "There are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle." Now, I personally love this quote because, of course, it fits in with what I've just been talking about, that you could choose to see that life is like one stream of, one amazing thing after another, even amazingly painful, amazingly sad and tragic, amazingly overwhelming. You could choose through this lens through which you view your life, you could choose to look for everything about it that seems miraculous. And whatever doesn't look like a miracle right now, you could also choose to just reserve judgment about. Just hold it lightly and be patient and wait, because maybe there will be a time in the future when you'll be able to see a miracle within whatever difficulty has occurred. That's what I'm talking about, kind of how I am choosing to live my life in a sense. But the other way of looking at things, if you decide, as the person I was talking to did, if you decide there are no silver linings, there are no miracles, those don't really happen, you can choose to view life that way. You can choose to say, no, I don't buy it, and I don't see it. And the fact is that you really won't see it. You won't see meaning. You won't see silver linings because you've already decided to create a filter over your vision, over your lens that says, no, I don't see that ever. I don't see silver linings. I don't see meaning. I don't see miracles. I don't believe in them. Therefore, they cannot happen. And so I understand in this quote, there is a way to live in which you could see nothing ever as being a miracle, that nothing that happens could be miraculous. Nothing that happens could have a reason behind it or meaning to it, because you simply shut out anything that would disagree with that point of view. And I understand where this mode of thinking could come from. And part of it is that as we grow in consciousness, we begin to reject magical thinking. And magical thinking happens earlier on in our consciousness journey. Some people stay in that state of magical thinking where they simply believe things that are told to them without really having a deeper sense within them of what is true, without having discernment. And there's a sense of wanting to believe things simply because we would like it to be that way. And I think that's a type of magical thinking, believing that things just have to be the way I prefer to see it, and shutting out any information that disagrees with that perspective. And when we grow in consciousness beyond magical thinking, sometimes we reject that type of thinking altogether. Then we go into a state, in some ways 180 degrees to the opposite, as we reject magical thinking because it's not grounded enough in reality. We may tend to reject all views of the miraculous in the world, all views of meaning, all the silver linings, because it feels a little bit too much like the magical thinking of a younger age, a time when our consciousness was not as developed as it is right now. So I see how on this journey of consciousness, it can be natural for us to reject this way of thinking, to not want to see the world through these rosy glasses of miracles being possible in the world. But I believe that we can transcend magical thinking and no longer engage in that. We can continue to be grounded in the reality of life, the rationality of life here on planet Earth, but we can also see life as if everything is a miracle at the same time, and live with that perspective and that mindset as we gaze out at life itself and what life is bringing to us. And I was having this discussion with my daughter today, Gia Snyder, and she said this very quotable quote just spontaneously in our conversation. She said, "You don't need magical thinking to participate in the magic of life." And I think that's absolutely true. We move beyond magical thinking because magical thinking doesn't really get us anywhere. It doesn't really help us actually live our day-to-day lives. It's a bit of an escape from life in a sense, and keeps us from really participating in the nitty-gritty of life, the challenge, the pain, the hurt, the grief. So it's good that we grow beyond it, that we transcend it. And it's natural to go through this phase of not being able to see anything as magical or miraculous in life. But ideally, we can get a little bit more clarity in our lens and open up our filter a little bit more and begin to let in this idea that maybe when we look at life as a whole, maybe there is some meaning there to be found. maybe if we take responsibility for it, we could decide, I want to be able to see my life. I want to be able to see what is miraculous in this world around us. And sometimes I just look out at the flowers that are growing in the gardens along the walkway when I walk on the sidewalk, and I see this variety of incredible plants that are growing there and blooming, and it feels incredible to me. It feels like a miracle to me to see this diversity and the variety of color and shapes and the type of petals, and it's amazing. And to be able to see nature as a miracle is truly a gift, because you just have to walk outside your door and you're surrounded by it, and you can see it everywhere. You can see the beauty in it. And suddenly it gives your life this overall sense of goodness. There's something good and something beautiful in everything, even in the most tragic, even within pain, even within our sorrow and our suffering. There is beauty to be found in everything, and there's goodness within everything. And that's what the miracle is. And that's where the meaning comes from that I'm talking about, is this ability to be able to simply see it that way, to make the choice. And Steve Jobs talked about it, to make the choice to look back and connect the dots and recognize how things are connected together, to see the tapestry of your life and how it's made up of millions of tiny, tiny little moments, each of which have had a significant role to play in creating the whole design of your life. For me, that's how I find meaning in what happens to me and in what my life has consisted of. And yes, on a day-to-day basis, things happen, and I don't see it in the moment always. Often there will be things that happen that I don't understand. I wonder why, and I don't have an answer, and I can't see the silver lining. I can't see the meaning of it. And yet I accept and I understand that there will be a time when I see it differently, and when I have more clarity or a broader and bigger vision, and I'm able to incorporate it better into my life and the meaning of my life as a whole. So those moments, I hold them. I carry them with me without judgment, knowing that one day I may be able to see more clearly what the meaning was and the reason why it may have happened, and to see that there was a silver lining that was there that I couldn't detect in the moment. So that's all for today. That's all I wanted to talk about today. And I hope that this inspires you to do some thinking. Where do you find meaning in your life, and how do you find meaning? And what's important to you? And what kind of lens are you looking at your life through? So until we come together next week for episode number 100, remember that we're here for love. And that's one thing Viktor Frankl discovered, is that the search for meaning is really about love. So face your fear, be ready for whatever life brings you next, and love each and every moment of your very precious life. Bye-bye.